Flat pedals versus clipless pedals, which is faster? The answer will surprise you. So typically when you hear that kind of clickbaity title, the answer will surprise you. It doesn't really surprise you, but in this case, my friends, it may actually surprise you. So I know clipless versus flats has been tested ad nauseum by many different channels, but whenever I watch those tests, I'm always a little bit skeptical about the results, so I finally decided to test it out myself. But with a little spin, I feel like most of those tests are testing clipless versus flats for the performance sports cyclist, but I thought I would do it within the context of the average rider. So someone that doesn't race, someone that probably doesn't train by power, someone that just JRA, just rides along. So I know you hardcore engineers are probably gonna flip out over this test, but trust me, I did the best I could with what I had. So let's talk about the conditions of this test. The route I did the test on was a 0.9 mile climb here in Missoula. The grades average between 5 to about 8 to 9%. So pretty consistent, and it's a route that's generally not affected by wind so much, so I could take that out of the equation. And for the test, I decided to ride in that upper zone 2, lower zone 3, so within that endurance range, typically what my all-day climbing pace would be. I did the test completely seated, so no standing climbing, trying to just keep things even and consistent. So trying to best approximate the way that most average cyclists ride. I know there's no real average cyclist, but just humor me for a second. The bike I used for the test was my Crest Bambora. It wasn't set up in a particularly lightweight configuration. I had a saddlebag on there, but the load was about the same. So again, I am testing for the average rider, and most cyclists will carry things when they ride. For the flat pedal riding, I rode in some 510 shoes and paired that with some EC aluminum flat pedals. For the clipless runs, I used some Quack gravel shoes paired with pretty basic Shimano SPD pedal. In terms of trying to get things consistent, the best tools I had was a Wahoo computer, and I paired that to a Wahoo ticker heart rate monitor. And I know you don't have to tell me how wildly inaccurate heart rate can be. It can vary by how rested you are, temperature, all those things, but once again, using the tools I had available to me. In terms of the number of rides, I did 6 rides total, 3 on the flat pedals, 3 on the clipless pedals over the course of 2 days. So before we get into the numbers, I do want to say that these days I tend to typically ride in flat pedals, though I have used clipless pedals for years, so it's not as if this is my first time using clipless pedals ever. Okay, so let's dive into the numbers. First, these are the rides with the flat pedals. On this first ride, I went out a little bit hot, and I was initially trying to ride the heart rate, but as many of you know, there's kind of a delay between what the number reads and what your actual heart rate is. So this one was definitely a little bit of an anomaly, but it was still within that upper zone 2, lower zone 3 heart rate range. So in that first run, I averaged a heart rate of 141. The average speed was 6.5, and it took me 8 minutes and 25 seconds to get to the top of the climb. In the second run, the average heart rate was a little bit lower at 138. The average speed dropped down a bit to 6.2 miles per hour, which kind of makes sense. And it took me 8 minutes and 47 seconds on that attempt. On the final run with the flat pedals, my average heart rate was 139, average speed 6.2, and it took me 8 minutes and 46 seconds to get to the top. So with these 3 runs, I think the second and third are a pretty good approximation of my typical climbing pace using flat pedals. All right, so let's get to the clipless setup and see if it was faster. My first run, again, I went a little hot on this one. My average heart rate here was 140. My average speed was 6.4 miles per hour, and it took me 8 minutes and 33 seconds. So interestingly, when you compare this to my first run on the flats, I was still actually faster on the flat pedals. Granted, my average heart rate was a little higher on the flats, so I exerted a little bit more energy, so it would make sense that it was faster. But the average heart rate was only faster by 1 beat. In my second run, I was able to pace myself a little bit better. Average heart rate was 138. Average speed was 6.1 miles per hour, and it took me 9 minutes and 2 seconds to get to the top. And lastly, on my third run with clipless, my average heart rate was 139. The average speed was 6.2 miles per hour, and it took me 8 minutes and 50 seconds to get to the top of the climb. So I have to be completely honest, when I got home and downloaded the numbers, this was a huge surprise, because by all accounts, for me at least, riding with flat pedals was pretty much faster all across the board. Granted, not by much. I don't think it's like a significant amount, especially if you're not in competitive cycling. But if you're just a daily rider, bike touring, or bike commuting, the numbers are fairly close. And for me, the flat pedals were actually faster. I think what's fascinating is that on the third run of both the flats and the clipless, they were nearly identical. So the average heart rate was spot on at 139. My max heart rate was 143 for both. Average speed was 6.2. Again, this is to the nearest 10th place, so there might have been some variation. But at the end of it, I was 6 seconds faster on the flat pedal. I think one thing that was interesting was when I was riding, I definitely felt faster on the clipless pedal. And I think part of this is because when you're attached to the bike like that, you feel all the road vibrations, and that's kind of a proxy for speed. But stepping back and then looking at the numbers in this particular test, the clipless pedals actually weren't faster. I know some of you guys are going to accuse me of sandbagging, that, I have my own personal bias, that I wanted the flats to win, but honestly, I tried my best to keep it nice and level. If anything, in my head, I had prepared a dialogue of, yes, clipless might be faster, but does it make sense for the everyday rider? But after doing the test, it seems as if flats are actually quicker for me. So what does this mean? Does this mean that everyone should be riding flats if you want to go fast? No, that's not what it means. I interpret this information to mean that in terms of speed, they're actually fairly close, more so than you would think. There are instances when I think clipless is definitely quicker. If you're doing a hard sprint and you want to stay connected to the bike, then I think that's where clipless has an advantage. But if you're just riding along, everyday rider, aren't doing any super hard efforts, but are just staying at that endurance pace, then there's something to be said about riding flat pedals. Mostly what I want people to take away from this test is that if you want to ride flats, and that's all you want to do, then that's fine. Don't feel pressured to, get real pedals on a real bike just because other people want you to. Because depending on the kind of riding you're doing, flats is probably going to be good enough. And also, as a side note, I can't tell you how many stories we've heard where one partner was trying to get their other partner to ride clipless because that was the right thing to do, and it ended up in a big fight. And ultimately, this data tells me that it's not worth it. If you want your partner to ride a bike with you, let them ride however they like. So what do you think of the findings? Do you agree or disagree? I'm sure you will let me know in the comments below. If you like this content, you know what to do. Like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. And as always, keep the supple side down.